I can't say I'm a human-computer interactor researcher by day and something else by night, because like I sleep at night. Come on.
Maybe you're a superhero.
Yeah. My name is Laurel Olberg. I'm an associate professor of computer science, and I'm a human-computer interaction researcher. When I teach courses, I tend to teach upper-level human-computer interaction design courses, and often these are courses that are studio-based. So a studio-based course is similar to project-based learning, but the way the format works out is you are bringing together a group of creative designers in one space. They're all working on different projects, but the notion is to build a community around it that's anchored in the space itself. This is the seminar room and the space where we're often teaching studio-based courses. One of the big features of this room is that it has tons of whiteboard space, so that when students are in class, we might all be focused on the slides that are on the screen, but then eventually, inevitably, it will turn into activities, at which point the students can turn around and they will have whiteboard space to have a discussion, post ideas, sketch, put up their materials for critique, just by going around the perimeter of the classroom. Part of the class is creating a structure for that creativity, but part of it is creating that community, that environment where you can feel free to be kooky and zany and off the wall. Also a place that's safe, so when you're coming up with ideas or sharing ideas, if things don't work all the way, we're all supportive of each other, and we're available to give feedback to each other. So it's not just me as the instructor giving feedback to all of the students, but it's students giving feedback to each other about their ideas. But the challenge is, it is a room that's used for a lot of different classes. So every time you arrive, it might have remnants of the previous class, it might be all clean. And every time you end class, it's this rich space full of sketches and ideas. And unless you take pictures, that will all be lost. And you can't necessarily go back to the space as it was when you finished your class. I came back from parental leave in January 2021. So pandemic was sort of already in progress, and I had a little bit of time to wrap my head around what it would mean to teach during the pandemic. And I was slated to teach Computer Science 581, which is an advanced human-computer interaction design studio. So usually about 30 students, 3-hour block of time once a week. And the typical format of the class is one introductory mini project, and then 3 projects where we introduce new interactive hardware and prompt students to think creatively about how can you use this hardware that you've never seen before in an imaginative way that has rich interaction behind it. Usually it's very hardware-based, but now with the pandemic, I had to think about, well, how do I do demos if I can't go to the students' setup and see the hardware actually in action?
I only became a master's student because I took one of Laura's classes as an undergrad, but I believe CPSC 581 is the class that I TA'd for her. So Laura and I had already started planning out what it was going to be like, and we had blueprints for what the class would have looked like in a more traditional setting, so in person. Thing is, we couldn't really apply that anymore because one, we would have had to rent out hardware to people, and there are things, just accessibility issues.
So I took out one of the projects and instead focused on career skills and wellness a little bit more, to think about, okay, how are we doing, how does this class make sense in terms of your broader career goals? And I converted all of the projects to be web-based, so that way we could still do demo sessions, but online. That still had the problem of, what do we do with the studio-based format? Because we're so used to not just having demos, but having rich participation and rich peer feedback when we go around the room. So all of the students see all of the projects in whatever state they're in, to appreciate the creativity that's coming out of the class and to give feedback on where ideas currently are, where they could go, and maybe get ideas for the next time around. As an instructor, I was concerned about my own awareness of where the group was at, because if you do a typical Zoom lecture, Zoom breakout rooms, you don't necessarily have a sense of what kind of progress people are making on a task or where they're going. So from some colleagues in the Interactions Lab who'd been working on projects in a distributed format before, they had used Miro in the past and recommended it as a way to do sort of collective brainstorming online. Miro is an online collaborative whiteboard web-based software. So you visit the Miro website, you log in, and now you can create whiteboards, sort of an infinite canvas, really. And then within Miro, you can then use tools to edit the whiteboard, to add things to the whiteboard, to annotate it. It actually scales immensely, so unlike many other systems that I'd played with in the past, you can have 100 people on the same Miro whiteboard and the performance doesn't lag. So you can zoom out to see everything that's going on, or you can zoom in on particular details to look at them up close. And much like a studio course, I am able to sort of start with slides. Like I can by all means go into classic slideshow mode where I have slides, I go from slide to slide. In this case, this was the first class, I was introducing the class, but at some point we sort of diverge from there and do in-person activities, or in this case, synchronous activities as a group. And I started looking at what Miro was capable of. One thing that was very nice is they have public links that are available, so I didn't have to require my students to create a Miro account in order to participate in the class. But for me, the most important thing was I could actually invite everyone to participate on one Miro board and get a sense of where the group was at and effectively walk around the room. So each of them had their own workspace, which is sort of analogous to the desk in front of you or the whiteboard in front of you where you're supposed to do the activity, which meant that they could also walk around the room, have a shared representation in small groups, but also as a large group, look at each other's boards and see where the group discussion had taken each of the individual groups of students.
I mean, maybe it's a computer science student thing, but we tend to be a little bit more introverted. So I think it was easier for me to teach the class through an online scenario rather than in person, because I have had teaching experiences in person, right, before the pandemic began. And I was pretty much always a nervous wreck. But the way I approached the online tutorials was I was basically a streamer, right? Like I had this set up in OBS. It's a broadcasting piece of software where I would have like my camera in the corner and then sharing the video and then like doing other like overlay stuff. One thing I like to do was put on background music, which I think relaxed me and also relaxed the students.
So in this case, I asked them to brainstorm 10 things they have in common with their classmates. So they each went to their own individual workspace and worked on that prompt. I set a timer so that they could know how long they have to work on that prompt. And this is where I started to build in that dynamic of individual thinking, but then consolidate again as a group. So I asked them to, when the timer ran out, make a copy of their stickies and bring it to a shared canvas where they would then look at everyone's ideas and then cluster them together. So this notion of divergent and convergent thinking is very common in design. So they all did divergent thinking, but then bringing all of those ideas together and looking for patterns is the start of convergent thinking. It fit into a lot of existing studio practices like brainstorming. So the metaphor of stickies works brilliantly. And even the idea of a canvas. So when we taught this class in person, we often teach it in a room with lots of whiteboard space, lots of surfaces to post things on. So the notion of an infinite surface really worked very nicely. And because it's such a long course, it's a 3-hour block of time, which is actually a long time to be trying to pay attention and have your brain still engaged. So I would also include offline breaks. Oftentimes these were activities that are away from a computer, but get them to walk around their house and look for inspiration, for example, or walk around their house and try to put together their analog design kit. Because I'm able to, over time, develop norms that my students can expect. They know that when they see a colored block, that probably means it's an offline break, so they know the offline break is coming. But for different activities, especially during critiques, what I would do is I would sort of pre-allocate the workspaces for them. So this is an example of the critique template. So the way it works is whenever they finished a project, they would have a link to that project on the internet so everyone can access the same link. And then we had a common structure to all of the crits, which was I like, I wish, what if, and then a sort of overarching feedback on the portfolio itself, the presentation format itself. So not necessarily the idea or the implementation, but how they're communicating that idea.
Miro was a great place to put all of the feedback in one place because the students would present their projects. So we basically had, during the presentation, we had a special Miro board for that. And then during the presentation or even after the presentation, you could write a sticky note and just put it into I liked, I wish. Sometimes you have things that you want to say, but you're too embarrassed to say it in, to their face. Or I really liked your project, but I'm embarrassed to say it.
The comments that you end up seeing are not necessarily from that student, but it's from all of the other students in that group who are providing feedback, providing comments on that student's work. So the first class, I had my students do a few warm-up tasks with Miro to make sure that I was introducing Miro as the platform for the course, made sure that everyone was comfortable using Miro before we got too far into the course to make sure that my students weren't suffering in the class. If this technology was not working out, I wanted to know soon. But I actually got a lot of really good response from my students on the effectiveness of Miro, and they were telling me that this is actually one of the more engaging courses they were doing online because they were participating in this sort of infinite canvas space. So one of the things I do in my class when it's in person is I take attendance via sketching. So this is an example of an attendance sketch. So in the top corner, I would have draw your ideal breakfast, that's the prompt. And then this is actually a grid of boxes that have all of the students' names, so you know which box is yours to go into and add your sketch. My TA would go in and look at these afterwards to keep track of attendance, but once attendance was over, I could then hide the frame. So now if you arrive late, you've missed the attendance sketch, you can't see what the prompt was, you aren't able to add things to it. So that actually made it so that we were able to capture who was there on time in a fairly effective way. And we had a lot of fun with it too. We were using emojis to react to things. We were able to bring in videos and memes, which was a lot of fun for the students to have a little bit more fun and make it a lighter space, which in the context of creativity is very important. You don't want to be too serious because you want to leave room for more like spontaneity and creative ideas. And I also had a lot of fun using emojis as basically clip art. So this is a great example of, I was talking about priming and fixation, which are sort of two sides of the same coin in design. If you want to have priming to go towards good ideas, but you don't want to fixate on an idea because that will limit your creativity, which I represented using a zombie and a superhero because I could, because it was available as emojis. I've continued to use Miro even as we've come back to in-person learning, in part because it allowed me to set up an online space that students could access before and after the class. So even after the class ended, students could kind of come back to the virtual room, which was impossible to do in the physical room because you had to reset it for the next class. So I kind of like having Miro even in person. It's a nice channel that isn't just dominated by the people that talk the most. A great tool for an interactive class. I wish we had all our classes in Miro, just Zoom is boring. Because I primed my students with I like, I wish, what if, I had people saying, I wish I could download the content of Miro for offline viewing. This is looking at Miro with new eyes at the end of the class because they see it as an interaction designer would, which is lovely. As someone who teaches interaction design, it's lovely to see that. And I feel like at the end, it was great as a much more in-depth course review. I felt like I got a lot more detailed feedback, in part because I knew that my students were thinking back, not just to back in time, but also back in a virtual space. So having that virtual space that represents that class on that day has been really, really helpful for my students overall. I also like how it allows all students to very actively participate, and not just the ones in the front row, not just the ones who raise their hands. You actually get everybody participating, and you have traces of everyone's participation, so that even if you're not necessarily the one who has the spotlight as you're recapping the discussion, it's clear that yes, you are thinking, yes, you are participating, yes, you are engaging in the task.